Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into a particularly troubling case. In psychology, there's a term called Adele syndrome, which describes an unhealthy obsession one person can have with another. This term is named after the youngest daughter of the renowned French writer Adolphe Hugo. She was an attractive young woman and a talented pianist, but her unrequited love deeply affected her mental health. As a result, this beauty ended up ruining both her own life and the life of her infatuated admirer. He relentlessly pursued her, pretending to be her husband, which led to the destruction of his career and personal life. Tragically, Adele spent 43 of her 84 years in a psychiatric hospital due to her condition. It's important to note that such obsession, where someone becomes excessively fixated on another person to the point of losing control over their emotions, is relatively common. In many cases, an experienced psychologist can offer help. However, severe cases may require hospitalization and intensive therapy. At its extreme, this kind of obsession can verge on insanity, driving individuals to engage in desperate, unpredictable, and extraordinarily cruel actions. The case of Emma Ljungstig. The case of Emma Ljungstig in 2008 shocked all of Europe, becoming one of the most brutal cases in Swedish forensic history. The perpetrator was initially deemed insane, and due to the lack of concrete evidence, there were even discussions about closing the case. However, the true nature of the perpetrator was revealed in the courtroom. Emma Ljungstig was born in Stockholm on February 16, 1985, and spent most of her childhood and adolescence there. Raised in a modest family, she was the younger of two daughters, and grew up alongside her older sister Christina. At the age of 19, Emma married a young man named Nicholas, whom she had been dating since high school. Nicholas was not much older than Emma, and by the time of their marriage, she was already expecting their first child. Emma became a mother at 20 when she gave birth to a son named Max. A year and a half later, she had a second child, a daughter named Saga. Despite the arrival of their two children, Emma and Nicholas were still very young and unprepared for the challenges of family life. They frequently quarreled over minor issues, struggled to communicate, and soon after the birth of their daughter, decided to separate. But then the issue of child custody arose, leading to a difficult and painful process. Nicholas wanted not only to support the children financially, but also to play an active role in their lives and upbringing. Emma was initially open to this, but soon she entered a new romantic relationship. She moved to a small town called Aruga, about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, with her new partner and took the children with her. Nicholas opposed this move because he wanted to see his children every day. The former spouses repeatedly found themselves in court to resolve the custody dispute. Nicholas even threatened Emma, prompting her to report the threats to the police. As attempts to resolve the situation amicably failed, both parents began to pursue sole custody. Emma's new relationship was with a man named Torny Hellberg, whom she met online. They quickly connected and began a romantic relationship. Torny was unfazed by Emma's two children from her previous marriage. He had long desired a family and was ready to accept them as his own. The couple initially lived in a small house inherited by Torny. However, when they decided to marry, they moved to a larger house that would provide each child with a comfortable room. At that time, Torny had a stable job with a good salary, while Emma focused on raising the children and managing the home. Although she was a designer by training, she planned to return to her career in the future. The couple hoped to have their wedding in the summer of 2008, but their plans were tragically cut short. The brutal massacre. On March 17, 2008, which was an ordinary Monday, Torny left for work early in the morning, while Emma stayed home with their 3-year-old son Max, and their 1.5-year-old daughter Saga. In the evening, Emma was preparing dinner and waiting for Torny to return. During this time, she was also chatting online with her sister Katarina, discussing a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. Around 6:30 p.m., Emma received a call from Torny informing her that he was running late from work. He told her to start dinner without him. After their brief phone conversation, Emma continued with her chores, fed the children, and then went back to her computer to resume her chat with Katarina. At 7:07 p.m., their conversation was suddenly cut off mid-sentence. Katarina found this very odd, as she noticed that Emma was typing a message that never got sent. Concerned, Katarina tried to call Emma, but there was no answer. She then called Torny to find out what was happening. At that moment, Torney was on his way home and was just approaching the house. As he stood at the entrance, he reassured Katerina that everything was fine. "Emma is probably just distracted by the kids," he said. "She'll call her back as soon as she can." But as he stepped inside, he was met with an eerie surprise. The front door was unlocked. As he made his way deeper into the house, he was immediately struck by the chaos that surrounded him. At first he thought the mess was just the result of the children's playful antics, but then he saw the brown stains on the floor. His heart sank as he realized with horror that it was blood. "Emma! Saga! Max!" he called out loudly, but there was only silence. His eyes scanned the hallway, and that's when he saw it. A small, lifeless figure lying in a pool of blood. At first he thought it was a doll, but as he drew closer, he realized with a jolt of terror that it was Saga. Her head and face were disfigured beyond recognition, her small body twisted in an unnatural pose. A few feet away he saw Max, his small body broken and battered, his skull fractured, and then he saw Emma, her face shattered and disfigured, her body covered in blood. It seemed that all three of them were gone. Tony's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and dialed the emergency number. "Please, you have to help me," he begged, his voice shaking with shock and horror. "Something terrible has happened here." Just then, Emma let out a faint groan and Tony's heart skipped a beat. The police and paramedics arrived quickly, and to their surprise they found a weak pulse in all three victims. They sprang into action, starting resuscitation efforts as they struggled to comprehend the horror that lay before them. "What kind of monster could do this to a young woman and her children?" one of the officers whispered, but for now, the only priority was saving their lives. As the paramedics rushed the victims to the nearest hospital, the medical team sprang into action, fighting to save their lives. The investigation into the brutal attack had begun, but for now the priority was to stabilize the victims and prevent further damage. The paramedics who had arrived at the scene had expressed doubts about whether the victims would even survive the trip to the hospital, but miraculously, all three, Emma, Max, and Saga, were still clinging to life when they arrived at the medical facility. The diagnosis was grim. All three had suffered open-head injuries with severe brain damage and extensive blood loss. The doctors refused to give a prognosis, instead focusing on doing everything they could to save their lives. Max and Saga were in critical condition, and even if they managed to pull through, it was unlikely they would ever be able to breathe on their own again. Emma's condition was assessed as very serious but stable. The young woman was put into a medically induced coma and hooked up to life support machines, hoping her body could cope with the trauma. As the doctors fought to save the victims' lives, forensic experts were working at the scene, trying to piece together the events of the crime. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Belongings were scattered everywhere, and blood stained the floor and walls. Unfortunately, the medics had left behind a trail of clutter, moving certain items around to access the victims. The floor where Emma, Max, and Saga had lain was literally trampled on, making it a challenge for the forensic experts to distinguish between the footprints of the medics and those of the perpetrator. The investigators were faced with a daunting task: to sift through the chaos and find clues that would lead them to the person responsible for this heinous crime. But as they began to process the scene, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were racing against time. The victims' lives hung in the balance and every minute counted. As the investigation continued, the police were able to piece together the timeline of the brutal attack. Remarkably, the intruder had massacred the three victims in a span of just 13 minutes. The last message from Emma to her sister was sent at 7:07 p.m., and by 7:20 p.m., a frightened neighbor had already called the police. The brutality of the crime scene spoke of a personal motive and a deep dislike for the victims. The weapon of choice was a blunt and heavy object, likely a hammer, which the perpetrator had used to bludgeon the victims with ferocity. However, no such weapon was found at the scene, leading the police to conclude that the perpetrator had taken it with them. The first suspect was Helberg, Emma's partner. He was not married to her and was not the father of her children, which led the police to suspect that a domestic quarrel between the couple might have turned into a bloodbath. The grief-stricken man was immediately questioned, but he had an ironclad alibi. Firstly, he was working late, which was confirmed by his boss and colleagues. Secondly, at the time of the brutal massacre, he was walking down the street and was caught on several CCTV cameras. Despite his solid alibi, the police decided to take a detailed statement from Hellberg, hoping that he might have seen or heard something important that could help in the investigation. However, he couldn't remember anything specific, saying it was business as usual until he saw the mess and the bodies lying on the floor. The only thing that had alerted him was the unlocked front door, which could indicate that Emma had let the criminal in. After questioning, Hellberg was released. The investigation took a new turn as the police shifted their focus to Emma's ex-husband, Nicholas, the father of the children. The couple had been divorced for over a year, but their separation was far from peaceful. They had constantly quarreled, and Nicholas had even threatened Emma, which she had reported to the police. It seemed that everything pointed to him as the prime suspect. After the breakup, Emma had taken the children and moved to another city, leaving Nicholas behind. He had been denied custody of the children due to his hostility towards Emma, and it seemed that he had decided to take a desperate step. In a fit of rage, he had committed the heinous crime, crucifying his own children. Nicholas was immediately tracked down and taken into custody. But when confronted with the news of Max and Saga's deaths, he seemed crushed, sobbing, and asking if there was some mistake. When charged with the crime, he was initially stunned, then began shouting that he would never hurt his children, whom he adored. When asked about his whereabouts at the time of the crime, Nicholas claimed to have been away in another city on business. The alibi seemed suspicious, but it was soon confirmed that he was indeed 120 miles away from the crime scene when the massacre occurred. As the forensic investigators continued to search for clues, they were faced with a daunting task. The perpetrator had worn gloves, leaving no fingerprints, and the traces of shoes were difficult to distinguish due to the presence of a dozen doctors who had rendered assistance and removed the victims from the scene. The investigation was proving to be a complex and challenging one, with the sole survivor, Emma, fighting for her life. The police were racing against time to find the perpetrator and bring them to justice, but the case was far from solved. The investigation would require meticulous attention to detail and a thorough examination of every shred of evidence to uncover the truth behind the brutal attack. The investigation continued, with the police collecting all the footprints at the crime scene to identify which ones didn't belong to the medics, Torny, or the victims themselves. The law enforcers were on high alert, fearing that the criminal might try to sneak into the hospital to finish what they had started, now that Emma had survived. As a crucial witness, Emma's testimony could give the perpetrator away, and the police were determined to protect her. A 24-hour guard was posted outside Emma's hospital room, and the police began interviewing neighbors to find possible witnesses. One woman recalled seeing a stranger in black clothes walking around Emma and Tor's house around 5 p.m. Although she couldn't see the person's face, hidden by a hood, she thought it was strange. The neighbor suggested that it could be a girl, given the figure's short and fragile appearance. The same figure in black clothes and with a hood was caught on a street surveillance camera located near the crime scene. The footage showed a short, frail-looking girl, but who was she, and why would she want to harm Emma and her children? As soon as Torny saw the first frames, his face turned pale and he said that it could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christina Schurer. Although he couldn't say for sure, Torny's reaction hinted at a deeper connection. Who was Christina Schurer? Born in Hanover, Germany in 1977, Christina's childhood was marked by her father's abandonment, which had a profound impact on her mental state and behavior. She grew up to be a willful and purposeful person, but with a complex character. As a teenager, Christina's life was shaped by her troubled past, and the police were determined to uncover more about her and her possible motives for the brutal attack. The investigation was taking a new turn, with Christina Schurer emerging as a prime suspect. But what drove her to commit such a heinous crime, and what was her connection to Torny and Emma's family? The police were determined to find out, and the case was far from over. Christina Schurer's life took a dramatic turn when she participated in an exchange program in the United States. She spent several years in New York where she received a good education in history and archaeology. Her passion for exploration led her to travel extensively throughout Europe, taking part in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, Christina arrived on the Greek island of Crete, where she landed a job as a tour guide at a popular hotel. It was there that she met 26-year-old Torny, who was on vacation. The two were immediately drawn to each other, and their affair began on the first day of their acquaintance. Christina, then 29 years old, was smitten with Torny, and their connection lasted for a week while he was vacationing at the hotel. After Torny's departure, they continued to communicate by phone and email. A few months later, Christina showed up at Torny's doorstep in Hellberg, Sweden, asking to stay at his house. Torny found her behavior too intrusive and tactless, but he tried to be polite. When Christina suggested a weekend trip to the mountains, Torny refused, hoping that would be the last time they would meet. However, Christina continued to call and write, insisting on a new meeting. In January 2007, during a phone conversation, Torny told Christina that everything was over between them and they should not meet again. But Christina pretended not to hear it, continuing to call and ask to visit him. She even suggested going on vacation together in the spring of 2007. Undeterred by Torny's rejection, Christina returned to Sweden in 2007 and began to stalk her former boyfriend. Her behavior became increasingly obsessive, and Torny started to feel uneasy and trapped. The police were now piecing together the evidence, and it seemed that Christina's fixation on Torny might have driven her to commit the brutal attack on Emma and her children. But what was the extent of her obsession, and how far would she go to get what she wanted? Christina Schurer's obsession with Torny only intensified over time. She persuaded him to resume their relationship, despite his honest admission that he was already dating someone else. Christina claimed that she had left some belongings at his house during her previous visit and needed to retrieve them. Torny agreed, but as soon as they crossed the threshold, Christina tried to seduce him. When he refused, she threatened that he would regret it. 3 months later, Christina returned, apologizing for her behavior and trying to persuade Torny to get back together. But he rejected her again. In the evening, she called him, claiming that she had swallowed pills because she couldn't live without him. Torny called an ambulance and also informed her family about Christina's antics, advising them to seek psychiatric help. After receiving treatment at the hospital, Christina's mother took her away and placed her in a psychiatric hospital, where she spent over a month. However, the treatment had little effect, and Christina remained obsessed with her former lover. She constantly thought about ways to win him back, inventing new reasons for meetings. In October 2007, Christina decided to move to Sweden and settled in the suburbs of Stockholm, where she rented an apartment with another girl. She began to pursue Torny again, and when they finally met, she dropped a bombshell. She had given birth to a son by him and had given the child to a foster family. Torny was shocked, but what he was most interested in was when it had happened. The last time they had been intimate was over a year ago, and they had met 3 more times since then, but Christina had shown no signs of pregnancy. Christina's responses were evasive, and each time she added new details to her story. In January 2008, after a dozen attempts to contact Torny, Christina's behavior became increasingly erratic. The police were now investigating her as a prime suspect in the brutal attack on Emma and her children. But what drove Christina to commit such a heinous crime, and how far would she go to get what she wanted? The investigation was about to take a dark and sinister turn. In 2008, Christina made a desperate attempt to win Torny back. She sent him a message claiming that their son had been diagnosed with a hereditary disease and that they needed to go to Germany together to see him. She even added that the child's adoptive father would contact him with the details. But Emma, Torny's girlfriend, was not buying it. She suspected that Christina was trying to lure Torny to Germany under false pretenses. When Torny received a call from a man claiming to be the adoptive father of Christina's child, he began to ask questions. But the man was evasive, and eventually hung up the phone. Torny finally realized that Christina had made up the whole story and had enlisted someone to play along. The police were hot on Christina's trail. They quickly discovered her address and went to her apartment, only to find that she had hastily packed her things and left for Germany the day before. A warrant was issued for her arrest on March 20th, and the Swedish police had to seek help from their German colleagues to apprehend her. When Christina was finally arrested, she claimed that there had been a mistake, and that she had nothing to do with the massacre. But after she was taken back to Sweden on March 29th, she immediately requested a meeting with Torny, which was denied. Despite her calm demeanor, she periodically asked to meet or call her ex again. The police thoroughly searched Christina's rented apartment, seizing her phone and laptop for inspection. They also checked her clothes but found no traces of blood. By then, investigators had identified which of the bloody shoe prints at the scene did not belong to the medics and family members. They determined that the print was from an athletic shoe, and even figured out the brand and appearance. The size matched the one worn by the suspect, but Christina claimed that she never had such a model of sneakers. However, her roommate quickly refuted this statement, identifying the shoes as Christina's own. As detectives delved deeper into Christina's laptop, they uncovered a treasure trove of disturbing evidence. The laptop was filled with photos of Torny, both joint photos and those where he was depicted alone or with his new lover, Emma. But what was even more unsettling was a separate folder with a sinister signature containing pictures of Emma and her children. Christina had copied these photos from Emma's social media page and captioned each one with insulting, threatening, and downright scary comments. The recovered search history revealed a chilling pattern of behavior. Christina had searched for ways to commit a murder without leaving traces, how to hide evidence of a crime, and how to divert suspicion from herself. The notes on her laptop also contained a detailed plan of Emma and Torny's new home, including notes on when Torny left for work and when he returned, as well as the family's daily routine. Meanwhile, Emma's condition was slowly improving. Her vitals were stabilizing, and by the end of March, doctors decided it was time to gradually bring her out of the medically induced coma. When she finally awoke, she was still unable to speak due to the breathing tube, but her gaze was meaningful. It was clear that she recognized her relatives in the room, but she had no idea what had happened to her or how she had ended up in the hospital. As soon as Emma became strong enough to speak clearly, the police agreed to talk to her, but they decided not to tell her what had happened to her children, at least not yet. It turned out that Emma had no memory of the events of that fateful day, and believed that she must have been in a car accident. The detectives were faced with the difficult task of slowly revealing the truth to her, and they knew it would be a painful and emotional journey for everyone involved. Emma's desperate pleas for information about her children's well-being were initially met with evasive answers. But, as the truth could no longer be concealed, her family and medical team decided to reveal the devastating news. The moment of truth arrived, and Emma was told that her babies were no longer alive. The news sent her into a state of hysteria, forcing the doctors to sedate her. As she drifted off to sleep, the conversation was erased from her memory. But when she awoke, she asked about her children once more, unaware of the tragedy that had befallen them. This heart-wrenching cycle continued for several weeks, with Emma's brain refusing to accept the loss of her daughter and son. A month later, accompanied by medics, Emma decided to visit the scene of the crime. As she stepped into the house, a flood of memories came rushing back. She recalled texting with her sister, setting the table and watching her children play nearby. Then a knock on the door changed everything. Emma opened it to find a dark, short female figure standing on the threshold. When she asked what the stranger wanted, a sharp pain struck, and her eyes went black. The figure slipped into the house, and Emma, with her last ounce of strength, tried to catch up with her to protect her children. But she fell in the hallway, where the attacker attempted to finish her off. Christina, the accused, continued to deny her guilt, despite the overwhelming evidence against her. The murder weapon was never found, and most of the evidence was circumstantial, giving her a high chance of acquittal. However, her roommate revealed that a hammer had gone missing from her toolkit in March, which matched the murder weapon. Surveillance footage from a suburban bus station also placed Christina at the scene of the crime, where she had traveled 3 times in the week leading up to the murder. On July 29, 2008, the trial began, with Christina accused of double murder with particular cruelty, as well as attempted murder. As she entered the courtroom, her behavior was more than strange, leaving everyone wondering what secret she might be hiding. As Christina entered the courtroom, she smiled and waved at those present, greeting them with an unsettling enthusiasm. But when questioned about the brutal massacre and shown the gruesome footage of the crime scene, her demeanor took a dark turn. She suddenly burst into laughter, suggesting that the defendant might be insane. However, a psychiatric examination revealed that Christina was sane and fully aware of her actions. It became clear that she took pleasure in the heinous crime she had committed and didn't even attempt to conceal her guilt. A mother's trauma. When Emma faced Christina in the courtroom, she fainted, but when she regained consciousness, she revealed that she had finally remembered everything. The face of the defendant was the last thing she saw on that fateful day. Despite the defense lawyer's efforts to prove Christina's innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all counts. Justice served. Christina was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of release. She was also ordered to pay 20,000 euros in compensation to Emma. The investigation found no evidence to support Christina's claim of being pregnant and giving birth to a son. A new chapter. Meanwhile, Emma's recovery was long and arduous, but her partner Torny stood by her side. The couple got married in the summer of 2010 and are now raising 2 children together. Their kids know the tragic story of their older brother and sister. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining me on this shocking true crime story. If you want to explore more chilling cases, be sure to subscribe to my channel for upcoming videos.